Okay, so welcome to today's REI webinar, Online Post-Secondary Education for Workforce Development, Net Smart States and Students. My name is Jennifer Bruin and I am the Project Coordinator for the MSU EDA University Center for Regional Economic Innovation, also known as REI or the REI University Center. REI is supported by the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration and the Michigan State Housing and Development Authority. It was established in the fall of 2011 to support the identification, creation, and development of innovative economic development strategies that may yield high-growth entrepreneurship job creation in distressed regions of Michigan. Each year, the REI University Center selects and supports several innovative economic development projects, and these projects are led by experts in the field or by faculty at Michigan universities or colleges, and they are supported through small mini-grants or stipends to offset any costs associated with completion of the initiatives and research. REI has supported 17 co-learning projects since 2011. This year we have 8, and we're very proud of all of our authors. They're doing excellent work. Today we have Stephen Weiland, Professor of Higher Adult and Lifelong Education at Michigan State University, and he teaches online courses in graduate programs of the College of Education, including Adult Career Development and Education in the Digital Age. He writes and speaks about online teaching and learning from the perspective of cautious optimism about the relations of technology and education. Steve's research explores the advantages of Michigan's colleges and universities acting as if they were organized as a state system for purposes of making information about online courses, degrees, and services easily accessible. He's also suggesting maybe a portal for such a purpose might also be a platform for other forms of statewide collaboration, perhaps even new online degree initiatives adding to prospects for degree attainment in a state lagging behind others and building a well-educated workforce. Steve also considers what prospective students can do to advance their online academic abilities in anticipation of pursuing a degree. Yesterday we heard from Eric Friedrich, and his research is slightly different, taking it from a different angle. So today I think you'll find that Steve's will be complementary to what Eric is working on and his team. And both of them will be at the Innovate Michigan Summit. And so I highly recommend that participants today here at the webinar should encourage others from the workforce development groups and from others that are interested in digital literacy should definitely attend the Innovate Michigan Summit. We are full, but we are taking names for a waiting list. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Good afternoon. I see from the list the three of us are returnees from yesterday, and I appreciate your being here. I want to thank Jen and the Center for the opportunity to do this. We were talking just before it started how for those of us who write these reports, especially in the very fast-moving field of digitalization and online teaching and learning from year to year, there's so much change that opportunity to keep at it and work on it for a few years is educational itself. So I really appreciated this opportunity. If you follow the work of the Center, you know that 3 of the projects this year actually were in the area of digital literacy, education, and workforce development. What is really impressive about them, though, is that they each treat a different feature of the territory. Part of what I'll do this afternoon is continuous with what Eric did, and I have a small section of this presentation on digital literacy, but what I do there is rename it for the purposes of degree programs. So we will talk a bit about digital literacy, but I think as Jen said, this is what I do is complements what Eric did and what our colleagues from the Workforce Development Group in Ann Arbor did a few weeks ago. Here they focused on certificates and the pre-degree, largely pre-degree activity. In any case, I want to start with the 2 questions that animated this study. Let's see, can I get that? Good. There are 2. And you can see in these questions that the entire project and all the research I did is organized around 2 different elements of the general subject, an institutional feature and an individual feature. So these are the two questions I set out to work with. How well do Michigan institutions, colleges, universities, and allied organizations reflect the rapid growth of online teaching and learning, particularly in offering online certificate and 2- and 4-year degree programs and resources for prospective students to learn about post-secondary educational opportunities? I can give you a preview and tell you that the answer is not so well. Second question is, how can Michigan residents prepare for online teaching and learning, and thus for the lifetime advantages in work and personal development associated with completing a post-secondary certificate or a 2- or 4-year degree? I think since the state is lagging behind in its organization of online teaching and learning, in the degree domain, at least for workforce development, we can say, too, that preparing for such activities has been slow as well. I want to say at the outset, acknowledge at the outset, my use of the term net smart. I adopted it from a book that came out last year by Howard Rheingold with the title Net Smart, or How to Thrive Online. Now, there's some irony in me relying on Rheingold because he is largely what I would call a techno-utopian. That is, he's a believer largely in the technical transformation of the culture. Yet, unlike many others who write and publish on this subject, I admire Rheingold because he recognizes his critics, or he recognizes the debates in the online world about the consequences of the digital transformation. Jen mentioned in her introduction that I practice a kind of cautious optimism in this. Sometimes I'll tell students and colleagues on campus or elsewhere that I teach with and against technology at the same time. You'll see some signs of this in the presentation, but I admire Rheingold's recent book, even apart from the title, for his effort to recognize a debate about the impact on education of the digital transformation. But I love the term NetSmart, and I use it in the title and various times throughout, and I wanted to recognize Howard Rheingold's introduction of the term last year in this book. It's not out in paper yet, probably will be very soon, and it's certainly worth looking at. Well, as I said to open, the report has two primary parts. There's a brief third part that addresses what might be done, but the two primary parts are, as I suggested, the first about the institutional features of the subject, and the second about the individual features of the subject. So the first is called Post-Secondary Education Online Learning in the New Michigan. You'll recognize in the familiar phrase, the New Michigan. It's widely used, especially in workforce and economic development literature in the state, to refer to what needs to be done to renew the Michigan economy and what that will take in the work of in workforce development, in education and training. So I've adopted it here, and as you'll see in a few minutes, I treat this phrase with some detachment too, in part because many of the strongest advocates of the New Michigan, even where they address questions of education, are largely indifferent to the role of online teaching and learning. So, to get started, I take a step back and I address in my co-learning plan some of the context of college going right now. And if you read the New York Times or watch television, it's hard not to recognize the debate going on these days about the worth of the debate about college and whether it's worth going. Some of that derives from all the attention that's been going lately to the question of college costs. And that's surely an important part of it, and I'll get to that again in a minute. But what may surprise you is that despite some skepticism about college because of the costs, polling in the last year or two by both Gallup and the Pew Project on the Internet and American Society both show very high percentages of Americans still very confident about the value of college. The Pew survey, which is about 18 months old, showed that 86% of people who graduated with a BA or two-year degree thought that college had been a good investment. And 69% in a Gallup poll from last year said that they believe that having a degree is essential to getting a good job. Yesterday, Eric mentioned some figures that are similar about the changes in the job force. And there's general agreement that in the next 8 to 10 years, the percentage of jobs that will require digital literacy will increase. A different way to put it is that forecasts show that by, this is U.S. federal agency forecasts, show that by 2020, 65% of all jobs will require a post-secondary credential. Now, that's not the same thing as saying they require digital literacy. Presumably having a 2 or a 4-year credential carries with it a pretty good sense of what digital literacy is all about. But all indicators are is that the workforce is moving in the direction of more and more education and more digital literacy. Virtually everybody who writes about the situation in Michigan makes the same point. Now, they make it, and Eric mentioned this also yesterday in the context, and I think Jen mentioned it too in her introduction, in the context of the difficulty in the state right now, because we are in Michigan in the middle at best in degree attainment. We're just about a percentage point below the national average, and it's particularly worrisome if you like I am, teach at a state university and recognize the enormous investment the state has made over decades, especially in public higher education. We're not like Ohio. We don't have as many private institutions as Ohio, but we have a good number. Even so, college going in Michigan has lagged behind most other states, and that fact has in the last few years drawn a lot of attention in the context of efforts to build a new economy. It's not as if people don't believe that college is valuable, but even so, rates of college going in the state have lagged behind. Now, as the debate has taken place in the last year or two, the confidence that Americans have in college going has been named different things. A lot of the work that's often cited is from the Georgetown University's Center on the Workforce and the American Economy. And a few years ago, they introduced the term the college payoff to designate how it is that having a college degree has very positive financial consequences. Payoff was probably not the best word to use. After a year or so, they stopped using that term, and they substituted what they call the college advantage, which sounds nicer because it seems apparently less focused on rewards like financial rewards. In the past year or so, the favorite phrase has become return on investment. And that's the one that has dominated discussion in the past 6 months, and it's the one that President Obama has relied on in introducing a new higher education initiative. So return on investment is the favored way to discuss things now, but alas, it restores the financial returns to the argument for college going with the vocabulary of investment. And you probably know, if you saw any of the attention that the new federal initiative got, that the idea is to promote more information about 2- and 4-year colleges for parents and students, but in a more controversial, more information about graduation rates and other things that would influence students and parents in enrolling. The more controversial proposal is the one that would tie student aid to the records of graduates of particular institutions. So presumably now the institutions, if this initiative plays out the way it was proposed, institutions would be responsible for showing the job-seeking success of graduates and actually their incomes. So the return on investment idea was made very concrete in the President's proposals. In any case, the data surrounding return on investment has been pretty consistent over the past decade or so. That is, economists have determined that people with a four-year degree tend to, over their lifetime, make $20,000 a year or more, year by year, as a result of having a degree. For two-year degree holders, the difference is about $10,000 a year. And even I can do the math that would demonstrate how much that means over a lifetime. The difference is considerable. So the return on investment argument is a very strong response to the question of, is college worth it? That's not to say, though, that there aren't those who believe that we're overstating the drive towards college going. And there are some who doubt whether, as they put it, well, they ask why everyone should go to college. Of course, those who are promoting college going are very explicit usually to say it's not for everyone. Nonetheless, there's a counter movement that stands behind the view that there's lots of useful, valuable work that doesn't require a 2 or a 4-year degree, and we should focus more on vocational training in the high schools and certificate programs for the post-high school years. We all see the value of that, so it's not really a choice between the two, but finding the right adjustment in a state or as a nation in doing that. There's, by the way, a sort of parallel movement at the high end of the higher education system that is skeptical of college going. And Peter Thiel, the billionaire founder of PayPal, uses his foundation to support dropouts, typically from elite colleges, who leave college in order to become entrepreneurs. His goal is to show that you can be very successful in a new economy, largely in media programs, without a college degree. But that's a separate kind of movement. In any case, the is college worth it question, the answer to that has generally been, I think we can all say, that yes, it is. And I needed to make this point in my plan in order to move ahead to the question of why it's worth considering building on what we've done so far in online degree programs. But I want to finish this section just by underlining again what I hinted at in the beginning of it, and that is there are other returns to college going that don't have anything to do with a financial return on investment. That is, lots of other things happen in college going that are of value to people as they grow and develop. And the Chronicle of Our Higher Education earlier this year did a survey of academics and journalists and people in corporations and other organizations to probe the question of the return on investment. And it was good to see how many named other returns. I like particularly David Brooks's comment, the New York Times columnist, and he said career preparation and return on investment are perfectly legitimate ways of seeing an education unless they are the only ways. And he added, I wouldn't mind all the talk of education as an economic input if there were as robust a talk about the values that education was supposed to be offering. So I introduced the question of college going as to set out a context for what I'm going to talk about in a bit about the about online degree programs and their role in Michigan. There is already, as you probably know, a considerable amount of online learning in the state, and that's part of a decade of growth in online learning. Right now, according to this most recent survey, completed about 6 months ago, part of a decade-long project of surveys on online learning done by a group at Babson College in Boston. Right now, about a third of all American undergraduates, that would be about 7 million out of 21 million American undergraduates, are taking at least one online course as we speak, as we sit here this afternoon. And that, I think, is with Michigan State, most of the Big Ten universities, research universities, wouldn't be at 1/3, but I'm guessing now that Michigan State certainly would be. MSU has moved very quickly in the online domain, and the other Big Ten universities are more or less doing the same. U of M is moving much, much more slowly than MSU, and it's a very interesting question about the different rates that the big universities in the Midwest have taken in this regard. But nationally speaking, 1 out of 3 students are taking at least one online course right now, and some percentage of those students, we don't know exactly, are taking half or more of their programs online. We do have a figure for community colleges, and 60% of students at community colleges are taking at least one online course. That's almost double the rate of students in 4-year degrees, and 40% of those in community college are actually taking all their courses online. The survey research I'm quoting said 40% of the 60% would prefer to have all of their courses online, and almost 15% of community college students right now are in fact taking all of their courses online. So these are a few figures suggesting how rapidly online teaching and learning has grown. Remember that more than half of all American undergraduates are actually students in community colleges. So the figures for community colleges are particularly significant. That is, 60% are already taking one online course, 40% would prefer that their programs be all online, and almost 50% are online. Now, again, that doesn't quite apply in this state because we've lagged behind in building online programs in the 4-year and 2-year institutions. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, to be candid, I have to leave as an open question, even though the direction of my co-learning plan suggests that it would be a good idea for us at least to consider more activity in online degree programs. So there's been lots of growth, and a lot of it has been now fortified theoretically by a theory called disruption, claiming that it's the best way to understand online teaching and learning as a legitimate and valuable innovation. The theory of disruption is largely associated with Clayton Christensen, a business school professor at Harvard, who has been enormously influential in corporations and in the last year or two in education. His core idea of disruption is relatively simple. New products enter a market at the bottom. They're cheaper, easier to use, and gradually they gain in market share and take over for well-established companies. The computer business is a very good example of it, but he uses the theory to demonstrate the same principle in many other fields. People point, for example, to the photography, and what happened to Kodak is a good example of disruption by innovation in this way. In any case, Christensen has, in the past 6 months or a year, been very influential in higher education in naming online learning as an example of innovation by disruption. That is, it's a new force that sort of enters at the quote-unquote bottom of the system, and in that he's recognizing the sort of, despite its popularity, still relatively marginal role of online teaching and learning. Certainly it has less status than face-to-face education, and is more popular the lower down you go in the status hierarchy in American higher education. But what he believes is that online teaching and learning is playing exactly the same role in higher education that similar disruptions play in the world of corporations and the economy generally. And his argument has fortified the case that people like Howard Rheingold and others make on behalf of the role of technology in teaching and learning. And the idea of innovation by disruption has also been adopted by many higher ed leaders looking to control costs in higher education, assuming, and this isn't always the case, that online teaching and learning means cost savings. So the combination of the popularity of growth in online learning, that is now a decade growth, and the millions of students taking online courses, and the economic theory now associated with innovation via online education are two very powerful forces. One more thing worth mentioning under the heading of the digital disruption of higher education, there's another sort of allied debate, allied to the one over the value of college education, and in a way related to it now, that has derived from the digital disruption of college and university work. And that is a debate about the relationship of courses and competencies. As online learning took hold, it focused on the individual course. Not surprisingly, that's how colleges and universities are organized. Credit goes with courses, or for those who are not so keen on the system, it simply reflects, as they call it, seat time. That is showing up and completing a course. There are those in the online movement, though, who see it as a resource for a completely new way of estimating the organization and success of college work. And they focus not on courses, but on competencies. And many see online teaching and learning as a resource very well suited for people demonstrating their abilities and their worthiness of being awarded a 2- or 4-year degree by their demonstration of competencies. This can come with testing, putting together a portfolio, and other formats for demonstrating the ability to do something rather than the ability to complete courses. If you've heard of Western Governors University, which is a multi-state project, public institution, all online, it's in many, 15 or 18 states now. Indiana has a Western Governors state-supported branch. The Western Governors University offers all of its degrees and on the basis of competencies. They don't have traditional-looking courses. The students work with the online faculty there to demonstrate their abilities in a series of domains. Those domains are pretty much named according to the curriculum, but there aren't courses and the usual sort of structure of teaching and learning. Southern New Hampshire University has organized what they call the College of America, and that's an online 4-year institution. It's only 6 months old, though the institution is named for a region of a small state. The University of Southern New Hampshire has students actually all over the country in its own online programs, but the College of America is organized according to competencies. It's like the Western Governors University. And the new online degree programs called the flexible degree programs of the University of Wisconsin system, which are set to start next month, are all based on competencies rather than courses. So how far this debate goes, we don't know. Online teaching and learning was one disruption. If the idea of competencies takes hold, that will be an equally strong disruption, because it will disturb what we all assume about the structure of college work, that it's courses that yield degrees rather than the demonstration of competencies. Well, all of this is, the question of college going and the digital disruption of higher education. These are all, I've gone through these because these are all forces standing behind the thinking that's going on now about the value and uses of online degree programs. So I turn now to our local situation, and the title here is Online Post-Secondary Learning in Michigan, Doing Better Than D. Now, the reason it carries that title is because I was very influenced, as I did the research for this report, on a document produced last year by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And it was a study, among other things, of education in the states, education in relation to workforce development. And one question they asked was, has the state made efforts to embrace innovative ways of delivering college instruction? Has the state made efforts to embrace innovative ways of delivering college instruction? And in this category, Michigan got a D. That was a very strong tip-off to the problem we face in online teaching and learning. The Chamber of Commerce titled their report Leaders and Laggards, and Michigan, alas, is in the laggards, largely having to do with the problem of online teaching and learning. In order to get a sense then of where we stand in relation to others, I turn to an equally illuminating report completed just 6 months or 4 or 5 months ago by the New America Foundation, one of the best in studying post-secondary education, called State U Online. And this was a real eye-opener in the sense that it revealed how many states are moving very aggressively and, to my mind, quite smartly in the direction of more online teaching and learning. Wisconsin is now one of the most often cited examples for what they call the UWE campus, and what it offers potential students in coordinated efforts at making known online teaching and learning courses, programs, and degrees. There are other states equally impressive in what they're doing. Probably the best other example is New York. New York's online learning network, which again capitalizes on the fact that it's a state system to make known to potential students in the state all the different opportunities available at individual institutions and at emerging collaborative arrangements for program and degree completion. Now, as you can tell from the title of this co-learning plan, I have become very impressed with some of the virtues of the systemic approach. You probably know that this state is among a handful of states in the country that has no centralized coordination of post-secondary education, and that's the Constitution is written that way. The state, apart from setting out the budget, has no role in the governance of systems. We're utterly unlike Wisconsin, for example, in that regard, and most other big states. Now, I'm speaking as someone who's benefited from that autonomy. It means that individual institutions like Michigan State set their own policies, practice on their own, start and stop programs as they see fit, because the individual universities are autonomous. They are organized in something called the President's Council of Michigan State Universities of Michigan, but that's a collaborative body that doesn't regulate the institutions at all. It's there for largely for advocacy or lobbying, for sharing information, and for colleagueship. The state community colleges are organized for, in the Michigan Community College Association. They operate a little more like a system. Again, they don't regulate one another, but they have a more aggressive program of services that ties together what they do. And this year they started a virtual learning collaborative that, in its way, reflects the weakness in the state that the Chamber of Commerce report had identified. The Learning Collaborative began after the Chamber of Commerce research had been done. But the state university system operate autonomously and, let me risk going a bit too far in a way that's almost indifferent to online learning. They commissioned a report about a year ago, but the Business Leaders of Michigan, the organization called Business Leaders for Michigan, commissioned a study by McKinsey about a year and a half ago of the state universities, and they produced what's called a performance tracker designed to demonstrate how terrific are especially the research universities in the state, but the performance tracker has no measure of online teaching and learning at all. And it's interesting to compare the way the community colleges have responded and the state universities have responded. That's not to say the state universities don't have lots of online teaching and learning, but from the perspective of the leadership, online learning is pretty much invisible. The community colleges have made themselves much more visible, so to speak, with now the virtual learning collaborative, which allows someone to go online and see at least where the online courses and degrees are. I'll come back to the collaborative in a minute in a more critical way. So when I say, can Michigan act like it has a post-secondary system, I think that's about all we can do if we want to move in the area of coordinated or collaborative online teaching and learning that offers more opportunities for people in the state to gain 2- and 4-year degrees. I should have noted when I mentioned the statistics about degree completion in the state that Michigan actually has a high number, a relatively high proportion of people who have some college credit compared to other states. That would be a sign also of how useful it would be to move ahead in online teaching and learning, initially from the perspective of providing more information to people about how they can complete a degree online, and perhaps ultimately moving towards 2- or 4-year online degree programs, statewide online degree programs, as they're doing in Michigan. And later I'll talk more about that in the form of a portal. So the first half of this report, as I said, is largely devoted to institutional questions, and it focuses on the significance of acting as a system if you have one, or perhaps like a system if you don't. And what I've tried to suggest here is where the advantages might lie to acting like a system. Again, that would be in providing much better information than people have now about what, in a coordinated, centralized way, about what degrees and courses are available in the 4-year system. And if we go one step further, I suspect that if interest emerges in activities of this kind, it would probably be salutary to talk in the state about moving in the direction New York and Wisconsin and other states are in offering coordinated online 2- and 4-year degrees. Well, the second part, longer part of the second major part of the report is devoted to students, online students in post-secondary education. And I've titled that From Digital Literacy to Net Smart. And what this deals with is first questions of readiness. Virtually all 2-year colleges now who have anything more than minimal online activity post a section at the website called Are You Ready? That's what the section is called at the Michigan Community College Association Virtual Learning Collaborative website. It's called, when you click, it's called Are You Ready? And what it offers is a self-assessment for students about how ready they are to take online courses and complete an online degree. And in many ways, this is quite an admirable site, I have to say. I think anybody who sees this will be impressed by the intentions of the association and their effort to bring students into the online world in a way that minimizes the difficulties. The problem, of course, is in how these things are implemented. And here I have to confess some disappointment with the way that the association went about it. For example, the site recognizes the differences between online reading and reading from online texts, an absolutely critical feature of studying online. But it can only offer this advice to potential online students. This is what the website says. There are many websites on the internet that provide tips and techniques to improve your reading skills. By doing a search for, quote, reading skills or reading skills for distance learning, unquote, you will find literally hundreds of websites that will provide you with help. That is about the worst advice you can give possible to give someone to improve their reading and writing skills online. I thought Eric made a great point yesterday about the irony of recommending websites to people who are behind in digital literacy. I have to be honest, I never quite thought of that, and I loved that when he noted that's probably the worst way to improve digital literacy for people. If people aren't online, it's not a good idea to tell them to check a website. But the same thing is true here. I mean, people who are considering enrolling in a community college probably are struggling with the relationship of online reading and writing, which entails a host of very demanding, complicated questions of cognition and attention and pace and so on. So telling students to do a web search on this, and they'll get hundreds of sites, is probably going to be more self-defeating than anything else. And I have to admit, there's a footnote in my report which, alas, has to recognize that the VLC site of the Community College Association is riddled with typos and inoperative links. It's just not a good demonstration. It doesn't give anybody confidence that that online teaching and learning can operate the way they would hope. So, alas, as a whole, the initiative was terrific. I just wish it had been carried out a little better. But there are other problems associated with with readiness. One of them is the assumption that all members of the next generation, now say people who were born from the late 80s or early 90s, are automatically hip and savvy about operating online. It's just not true. We've had a host of studies in the last few years showing how the next generation, there's more myth than reality to that. And the questions of readiness for people taking online degrees, we need a lot of attention to exactly what they can and can't do online. And you've all heard of the familiar now the distinction between digital natives and digital immigrants. Like any formula, that way overstates the conditions we face. And I don't think we can make progress in readiness and then the prospects for people to go into online degree programs without recognizing the myth part of it, which is what prompts me later to address the question of how do you get ready for online teaching and learning. I said I would just simply mention the bandwidth. Eric did a great job yesterday of showing how important it is to pay attention to the question of broadband if we're going to get serious about education in the state. I mean, we're slow in a lot of, especially rural areas, and that probably describes areas that have a lot of interest in two-year degrees. So again, I'd urge you to stay close to Connect Michigan in the question of post-secondary learning and workforce development. So in this part of the report that addresses the questions of individuals, I do turn to digital literacy, and I review the recent history of literacy and the turn to digital literacy. I identify the problem as looking for the right name, because digital literacy, as Eric acknowledges, can call lots of things. Information literacy, silicon literacy, new media literacy, sometimes the new literacies. Now, so I've put my oar in and offered a variant on this in order to steer the discussion of digital literacy towards the topic of this co-learning plan, which is online degree activity and workforce development. And what I'm naming is something I call online academic abilities. And this is a specialized version of digital literacy for purposes of people enrolling in online 2- and 4-year degrees. And what I've tried to do in naming the online academic abilities is very different from when Eric is looking at digital literacy as a way of living. That is, you need it to get government services, to handle your health. I mean, there's many, many things that's handled in digital literacy. The part that I focus on in this co-learning plan is digital literacy for degree-seeking purposes, for enrollment in online degree programs. And that's why I've named 5 online abilities, beginning with habits of attention that are necessary, then online search, interpreting online resources, writing with digital tools, and collaborating on academic assignments. Now, we could spend the whole hour just working through these online academic abilities. What's worth noting now, though, is that these are specialized. This is a specialized version of digital literacy that I am identifying as useful to the degree we want to the degree we want to undertake activities that help people move into online 2- and 4-year degree programs. So I just want to give you a glimpse of these and identify how it is that I've taken the question of digital literacy and turned it in a different direction. This, again, is specialized for academic purposes, and that's what I mean by literacy, old and new. Now, I begin with habits of attention, and in this I agree very much with Howard Rheingold. And the reason I'm so preoccupied as he is with this is the problems we face in getting people ready for online teaching and learning with the direction that digitalization, or some of the consequences of digitalization for our culture. Some of you may know about an essay that appeared and has been widely circulated. It appeared a few years ago by Nicholas Carr called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And Carr's complaint was that all the clicking and all the linked activity are making us very impatient, nervous, and distracted readers. Since then, there's been a mountain of research on problems of multitasking and the problem of attention in all elements, all levels of education, and in the way we live our lives generally. Carr introduced the term, called the internet an interruption system. And if you work it all online like I do, or if you spend even a moderate amount of time online during the day, you know what he means by that phrase. This is, to some of us, the most pressing problem in education today. It's why I was so impressed in Howard Rheingold's book, Net Smart, of the focus he gives to paying attention. He calls it paying attention to paying attention. And that's where I start with my version of digital literacy and the online academic abilities. And I cite this terrific sentence: when it comes to interacting with the world of always-on info, the fundamental skill on which all other skills depend is the ability to deal with distraction without filtering out opportunity. And that's why I make paying attention the primary online academic ability. From there, I move to search as the online academic ability most in need of, that new students need to work on the most. That is how they do online search. For taking an online course, you have to understand how online search works. So I have a section of my learning plan reviewing some different efforts to identify the best ways to educate people in search. Finally, I do address, and here I disagree with Rheingold, the problem of participation. I'm not as keen on social media as he is. And I think this is where when I say I teach with and against technology, I'm not so sure that the social media are the best format for teaching and learning these days. I have a lot of colleagues who disagree at MSU, but I'm a skeptic on this, and it's something that is going to take some years to work out. So the question I always ask is, how much connectivity is enough in higher education? So I've reviewed now the institutional and individual features of the report, and that brings me to the last part, which is becoming Net Smart. And here I make three suggestions. I call it a portal, a primer, and a place. And I start with the portal because I think this is probably the best, most workable solution to the problem of initially of information. If you see what Wisconsin's doing, you see what Montana has, what Tennessee has, what New York has, it is so easy in these states to go online and see what all state institutions, there's a small exception in Wisconsin of the technical institutes, but the states that have done this right make it so easy to see statewide across all types of institutions, online course offerings and programs and degrees. We have nothing like that in the state. And I think that if we want to promote enrollment in 2- and 4-year degree programs as a feature of workforce development, I can hardly imagine anything that would be more useful in moving people towards degrees to the degree that we believe that online degrees are useful. Now that's not a settled question, but for many people, that's their best option. And I think anything more we can do to guide people towards what's available would be of great, great benefit. So I make some suggestions in the co-learning plan about how that might happen, beginning with a feasibility study of whether it be possible to mount a portal like this. There are some portals in the state that might be adapted for this purpose. For example, all the registrars in the state, all state institutions, are organized for purposes of transfer to work with one another. That sounds like an odd direction to come at this, but there is a statewide portal for that purpose already. And what I'm suggesting is a feasibility study that might look at that might look at an adaptation of the community college's virtual learning laboratory as another possibility to build up from. But a feasibility study would be first, then there would be the need, as Eric suggested, to bring the primary players together. There's going to be an obvious political problem here. The community colleges and the state universities have not shown a lot of interest in collaborating on much of anything, much less on this. But if workforce development is the theme, then the lever might be some combination of the primary workforce and corporate institutions in the state to the degree they have an interest in workforce development, but identify other organizations who might participate in an effort to organize something like this and determine whether it's technologically feasible and whether costs associated with it would be bearable. A third thing a group would do is, of course, is to look what other states are doing, because there are very good models now for moving in this direction, even without a state university system. Still, that's probably the primary obstacle to mounting something like this, because we don't do anything in this state across all levels of post-secondary education. This would be a first, apart from what the registrars do to promote transfer. The second thing I propose is a primer. This reflects the individual side of the question, and I rely here on the hierarchy of tasks to prepare for online teaching and learning that I borrow from Howard Rheingold and focus on attention. Everything depends on attention. But I think a primer, something along the lines of what Microsoft has done generally for search, or what Google has done for search, could be a very useful resource for people contemplating gaining a degree in order to improve their chances in the workforce. Obviously, online is the best way, but again, as Eric suggested yesterday, for people who are inexperienced or otherwise anxious about online, where print is still valuable. Finally, where could some of this activity related to preparing, learning more about online academic abilities take place? Eric mentioned libraries, and I'm an equally strong supporter of libraries, which are now, according to a recent survey, the primary institution in the country. More than 30% of people answering a survey about if they don't have a computer at home, where they go, it's the library. Rheingold himself says the library is already the leading American institution for training in digital literacy. What I would add to this, though, is the potential to mobilize a very rapidly growing cadre of professionals who could be an ideal resource to work with people looking to improve themselves in the workforce, and by getting into degree programs, using the primer that I identify as the second of the two, because I'm thinking of the tech staffs at the public four-year universities and the community colleges. I think MSU is typical. We have now dozens of people, centralized and in colleges, young people who service the technical features of our work, including the online programs. A quick informal survey of mine, I should say, yielded enough volunteers to staff all of Ingham County's libraries. Of course, they said they would be happy to do work of this kind. I think there is a workforce of people largely in their mid-20s to mid-30s who are very well prepared to do training of this kind in conjunction with libraries. So that's another way I think we might go about mobilizing preparedness for online degree work. So, as you see, I've closed here with an effort to balance the institutional questions and the individual ones. There's tremendous momentum all over the country right now on both certainly on the institutional side and also on the individual side. A lot of it derives from well-organized state efforts. That's going to be tougher to do in the state, but I think anybody looking at the research in the past few years, as this report shows, sees the timeliness and utility of making such an effort. So I thank you for your attention. We do have a few minutes left. If anybody wants to make a comment or pose a question, or Thomas Dietz is 100% right. That the Virtual Learning Collaborative is indeed, I agree, it's to promote online offerings. Its virtue, though, is that it does specify that where the offerings are. So that's a very valuable resource. But I think right now it's mainly geared towards recruitment and enrollment. The truth is that the states that have moved strongly in this way would say the same thing, that they are looking to improve enrollment. The question is separating out what's competitive in that between institutions from a statewide effort where the whole state gains from the more people there are in degree programs. And that's, again, very difficult in this state because we have no sort of formats for collaboration and working together. So everybody is in a market. In effect, Tom is right, everybody operates in a marketplace trying to recruit students for themselves. And that would certainly be an obstacle. Something like this. I suspect that institutions in Wisconsin and other states react ambivalently to the prospects of a fully online statewide earning online degree, like the one being that's been organized and will start in Wisconsin next month, even though all of the courses come from the state institutions. It will mean that degrees are going to be are somewhat less under the control of individual institutions if the program gains in popularity. But I think Tom is absolutely right about the sort of the marketing accent that is on the virtual learning collaborative.
I think that I do want to say one thing here to Steve, and I want everybody, whoever's still on, to hear me. It sounds like, Steve, that you've got a couple of different approaches to this that you're proposing. And the last piece about the libraries, I see that as, that's sort of a Craigslist for learning, kind of choosing, you said this cadre of professionals that are in their 20s and 30s and just looking at this county alone or this campus alone, that there are plenty of people that could probably assist libraries or help in a volunteer capacity or in some kind of maybe stipend situation or a funding opportunity. They could help the libraries to really kind of beef up or expand their programs. I think that's fascinating. It's a great idea. I'm sure it's crossed. Yeah. Right. Tom Dietz, Steve will search you out at the summit. Yes. Hopefully we'll have to maybe look for Michelle Mueller also. I think that she might be at the summit. Find her and touch base with her. Okay, so thanks. I'd like to chat with you at the conference about this. I have a lot of interest in this topic. Okay, Tom, great. And Tom's also working on a co-learning plan. Yes, yeah, I'll have to tell you more about his, or I guess I'll let him tell you at the summit.
I'll see you next week.
Okay, super. Thank you very much, Steve, and thanks participants today for joining us. And this is it for our webinar series for this year, and we will see everybody at the summit. Thanks. Bye.